Welcome back to Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Joining me via Skype is Hafiz Noor Shams. He was the former special officer to the Minister of Finance, which was YB Lim Guan Eng. He is an economist. Hafiz, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us. I want to get your review or your first pass towards PKS Plus, the additional or the addendum stimulus package that was announced by the Prime Minister yesterday. What are your thoughts regarding the PKS Plus announcement?
I think it's an improvement from before, obviously, but in my opinion, it probably needs to be much larger. Because you need to protect those jobs right now. And from what I see, I think it's just the size of the assistance is just not enough for wage subsidies. For instance, you are giving 600 ringgit for large SMEs and 800 and 1,200 for the smaller ones. But I think it's probably wise to cover everybody in SMEs at least at minimum wage level and slightly more, so that the SMEs don't have the incentive to fire people, to lay off people.
What do you think went through in terms of the tiering of the wage subsidy that the government is now has announced yesterday? Just to recap, if you are working in a small company, you're going to get 1,200 ringgit wage subsidy. If you're in a mid cap, you get 800. If you are in a large corporation, you get 600 bucks. And of course, if you're in a large corporation, it's capped at the first 200 recipients of the workers in that big company. And of course, you need to retain your employees for the next 6 months. There's plenty of caveats going around. But again, what do you think is behind the reasoning of the government making this tiered system?
Oh, I'm not part of the policy making, but I assume that the logic behind it is that they think the larger SMEs would have the financial capability to withstand whatever crisis we're having right now. I think that's the main logic behind it. But I think you're probably a bit counterproductive, because the objective should be to protect all jobs. And incidentally, larger SMEs are more productive than smaller SMEs. So that means larger SMEs tend to pay people more. So you probably want to protect those jobs as well, rather than just the smaller SMEs.
Do you think that this was an oversight? Do you think that the government had a grand scheme of plan, and therefore this is just one of the many things that they are going to roll out? Or do you think that this was an afterthought in terms of trying to help those in need through a stimulus package?
I think it's clear that it's a follow-up. It's not a grand plan. If it were a grand plan, they would have done it the first time they did it. I think it was clear that the government met with the SMEs Association after the first announcement. So that clearly shows that it is an afterthought in some ways.
You see, when they announced the first stimulus package, they were touted to be in the hundreds of billions of ringgit. But when you dissect it, it's just about 25 billion ringgit per se. Do you think that this PKS Plus is the same thing, where they put a price tag of it at 10 billion ringgit, but actually it's lesser than that actually?
Well, I'm not really hung up on the actual direct spending, right? Because a lot of the subsidies are a lot of the stimulus, so-called stimulus, is that it came from the monetary side, from a loan moratorium, which is actually useful. That's useful. That doesn't mean just because the government is spending 20 billion or 10, whatever, that means that the stimulus is not working. I mean, I think the important thing we need to do, apart from the size, is really the coverage, right? And in my opinion, there are two things you need to do. The plan right now is really good at giving cash assistance, but I think it's come a little bit short when it comes to switch subsidies. I think that's an important thing. Instead of size, we should look at the coverage. per se. I mean,
When you say coverage, how do you think the government can improve on the coverage? What do you think the government must do, and what do you think that the people can do to influence the government to ensure that more coverage can be given?
I think just make the size of the wage subsidy much significantly more. Fully cover the minimum wage jobs, 1,200, full covered for all SMEs, and then give a little bit more for other workers that earn above minimum wage, probably up to, my favorite number is 200% of a median wage, which is about 4,600, which is close to the 4,000 ringgit that the government gave. But it just need to give a little bit more, I think, so that at the very least you can fully protect the minimum wage job. Because you have to remember the objective of wage subsidy is actually to protect jobs, not to just lessen the operating costs of the SMEs.
Well, when we think about, giving out cash, do you think that it's a good idea to, instead of rolling things out as it is right now, we save it up later in order for us to have a better picture of what's going on and then release it then? The kind of saving up the bullet for a fight later on, that kind of notion. Or do you think that it's wise to do it now?
No, I think you need to improve it right now, immediately. I don't think the argument that we should save the bullet for later time makes sense, because by the time you wait, it will probably be too late. Because if these jobs are gone, they will be probably gone for a couple of months, and then there will be a lag effect. So it will take time for the job to recover itself, the job market to recover itself. So we don't want that to happen, because once there's a gap in the labor market, it takes a long time to recover. We want to be able to, once the supply crisis ends, we should be able to step on pedal immediately on full-on recovery, rather than just, trying to fill up the gap afterwards.
You see, when you mentioned the labor market, the graph that everybody was talking about was that crazy graph of the US job labor market that shot up into 3 million people overnight practically. Do you think that, let me just get two things from you. Why do you think that happened in the US to a point where it went from a manageable level to over 3 million people being unemployed in such a short time? And number two, do you think that it can happen in Malaysia?
Well, this is a supply side crisis, right? A supply side crisis in Malaysia is self-imposed, so a lot of people couldn't go to work, and a lot of businesses that are in just don't have the capability to pay people wages for a month. That's the reality of it. And the logical thing to do for them to protect themselves is to lay off the workers, because idle businesses. And I think it's probably going to be worse in Malaysia, because in the US you don't see a nationwide lockdown. In Malaysia we are doing that. It's a good policy lockdown, but you have to have the accompanying economic policy to mitigate the effect. But I think our mitigating policy is just not there yet, as far as wage subsidy is concerned. Like I said, now we're doing really good with cash assistance, but on the other side of the policy, we're just not doing enough.
You've pointed out that this crisis that we're going through is more of the supply side. Therefore, do you think that it's wise for the government to, while it's commendable to help the SME sector and the micro SME sector, it's also important for them to actually address the GLCs, the MNCs, the big corporations, in order for them to to churn out the necessary productivity that they have done before, and in order for them to not collapse? Do you think that it's important for us to now talk about how big corporations must be assisted by the government?
Yeah. Ideally, you should protect all jobs, but that's going to be really expensive, right? But it's just a matter of how much appetite you have to make the spending to protect all jobs. There will be the ideal policy is protect all jobs, regardless of SMEs or not. But protecting SMEs is a start, I suppose.
We know now that the SME employs 80% of the Malaysian workforce. Some numbers and some estimates go even up until the high 90s. Do you think that's why the government is focusing a lot on the SMEs and micro SMEs? Do you think that that's important to save that 80% of that Malaysian job population market?
Yeah. SMEs, I mean, compared to the big companies, SMEs probably are the weakest in terms of financial capacity in paying people for not doing anything. And also, I suppose SMEs is a politically popular thing to do. They employ 65%. If you protect the big companies, the political argument is clearly that it's government is protecting MNCs or the big companies that shouldn't be protected. But ideally, it should protect all jobs. But again, it's a matter of the government fiscal capability, which I suppose you can do, because it is a crisis, regardless of your restriction that you have. This crisis demand a huge spending. It is inevitable. And if the economic crisis comes, all those metrics like deficit numbers or your debt to GDP will shoot up just because the economy is contracting.
So it begs the question, right? Is what the government doing now a populist decision? Do you think that they do this to garner votes in the long run? Do you think that this is something that they are doing more for getting the population to like them, i.e. getting more political capital rather than what is needed? Or is this something that is definitely needed despite the political, benefits that come along with it?
It is political, but at the same time, I think, I mean, if you're referring to the cash transfer, it is political, but at the same time, it is needed, right? What I'm saying is that you need the cash assistance and you need the wage subsidies. Both will be popular anyway. I mean, a rescue should be popular anyway, because it would be saving a lot of people.
Right, I just want to get your final thoughts before we conclude this conversation. What do you think the government must do in the short to medium term, particularly when we talk about the government taking the necessary steps to sustain and prop up the economy up until at least the end of the year?
Because it's the uniqueness of this crisis is that it is a supply side crisis. It's probably the first supply side crisis we have since the 1940s during the Second World War and the post-war period. And because of that, in the short term, what you need to do is protect our potential. That means, in the simple terms, protect the jobs as much as possible, so that when the supply side crisis is over, when the demand crisis comes, which is already happening, we can just do the spendings, do this actual stimulus. But if we don't do the supply side mitigating policy right now, which is protecting jobs, it will be much, much tougher to address the demand deficiency later, because nobody can have a job. And when you don't have a job, you will rely on cash assistance over and over again. You don't want that. You want, when addressing demand crisis, you want these people to have jobs and they have their own spending power capacity. When they don't have a job, they wouldn't have the capacity, and that would prolong the demand crisis later.
Right, thanks, Hafiz. That was Hafiz Noor Shams, the former special officer to the past finance minister, as well as an economist, joining us for this conversation. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. There's plenty of interviews like this can be found over there as well. I also implore you to check out all our other channels and other shows. For instance, Consider This, where my colleagues Melissa Idris as well as Sharat Kutan, and along with our producer Hafiz Marzuki, continue to churn out some of the best episodes that we've had for a while on TV. Again, Consider This wherever you check the Astro AWANI shows. For now, that's it from me, signing off from my living room. Until next time.